Right now in South Korea, there is a comedy unfolding that is not particularly funny if you are a business owner. The country is currently experiencing a massive crisis in the self-employment sector. The numbers are bleak. 75% of small business owners in Korea are not even taking home 20 million won, which is roughly $15,000 a year. They are making less than the minimum wage. Many are deep in the red. But here is the most baffling part. While business owners struggle, the mainstream media and the experts are pointing fingers at rising platform fees and delivery costs. They are selling you a story about greedy tech companies. But here is the punchline: that is not the reason at all. It is the hypocrisy of the consumer market. It is the collapse of what I call romance capitalism.
Wait, hold on a second. What on earth is romance capitalism? That sounds like something you made up.
It is not a made-up concept. It is the engine that drove the Korean service economy for decades. For a long time, the entire Korean domestic retail and service economy was built on the backs of young men acting as financial white knights. These were men who would drain their savings to fund extravagant dates, luxury goods, and expensive nightlife just to secure the favor of women. It was not optional, it was a socially mandated burden on men. But here is the shocker. Young men in South Korea have suddenly stopped playing the game. Consumption has evaporated. Everyone wants to know why. And the answer is simple: ruthless, cold, hard capitalist market dynamics. Let's take a look at a typical scene from a few years ago compared to now.
I have booked the most expensive table in the city, just for us.
That is good, but I expected a slightly better gift than this.
Oh, I am sorry. I will definitely get you something more expensive next time.
That was the old dynamic, a financial transaction masquerading as romance. Now let's see what happens today when the cost-benefit analysis hits.
I am not interested in paying for that kind of experience anymore. It does not bring me any value.
How can you be so selfish? You are supposed to take care of me.
Why would I spend my savings on something that provides zero return on investment and offers no long-term security?
That shift is what we are seeing everywhere. And here is where the deeper, darker reality hits home. Why would they stop? Because men have finally performed a basic calculation. They realized the return on investment for this system is effectively zero. They were spending massive amounts of money for no genuine return, no security, and often only superficial social approval. It is a market correction. When you treat relationships like a transaction but provide no value, the customer, in this case the man, stops buying. In the past, the service sector could rely on a steady flow of date capital money specifically allocated by young men to impress potential partners. This consumption was not based on a desire for the food or the service itself, but on the social signaling value that these environments provided. When the cost of a single dinner out for two, inclusive of a main course, drinks, and potentially a secondary activity like a high-end coffee shop, regularly exceeded 20% of a young man's monthly discretionary income, the math became unsustainable. When this is juxtaposed against the reality that real wages for young men in Korea have remained largely stagnant over the last decade, while housing and essential living costs have skyrocketed, the abandonment of this behavior is not merely a social trend, it is a desperate survival strategy. The market, oblivious to this underlying shift, continued to expand its capacity, opening ever more high-end venues designed for these dates, and now they find themselves holding the bag. But why does society react with such collective panic? Because the entire societal structure was designed to commodify male desire. When men start opting out, the parasite begins to starve. The social dynamic in Korea relies on this continuous transfer of wealth from men to the luxury and service sectors that women frequent. Concepts like dating costs were socially mandated burdens on men, not optional expenses. The systemic flaw here is the misidentification of the economic catalyst. By framing the problem as delivery fees or high operating costs, business owners and policymakers are treating a structural problem as a surface-level annoyance. This ignores the psychological reality that men have begun to view their financial autonomy as more valuable than the ephemeral validation of a date. This is the MGTOW effect on a macroeconomic level. When young men are collectively forced to decide between participating in a system that they view as fundamentally extractive and focusing on their own individual, long-term financial stability, they are choosing the latter with increasing frequency. This shift in priorities directly empties the cafes of soul, not because the coffee is overpriced, but because the implicit social contract that required the purchase of that coffee has been unilaterally declared void. The economic contraction we are seeing is simply the result of a massive market withdrawal that the current commercial infrastructure in Korea is ill-equipped to handle, because it was built entirely on the expectation of continuous, unquestioned male financial subservience. When these men, increasingly aware of alternative perspectives, simply stop participating, the entire social fabric based on this wealth transfer begins to unravel.
But if they wanted gender roles to change, is not this what they wanted? Why are they complaining now?
That is the billion-dollar question, and the answer is breathtakingly hypocritical. They pushed for a society where traditional roles are discarded, but they also demanded that the traditional financial privileges remain for the women. It is a blatant contradiction. The market has no mercy for contradictions. When the men stopped paying for the luxury dinners, the high-end cafes, and the overpriced nightlife, those businesses collapsed. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. The same people who cheered for the dismantling of these traditional roles are now crying about the economic fallout of their own demands. They are essentially demanding the chivalry of the past while rejecting every responsibility that came with it. And the cold, hard logic of capitalism is punishing them for it. It is a classic case of, I want the benefits of a system I helped destroy. And right now, the storefronts in Seoul are empty, the nightlife is quiet, and the romance capitalists are wondering where all the money went. It did not go anywhere. The people responsible for keeping that system afloat just stopped believing in it. Truly, the most shocking thing is how obvious this should have been. For decades, the system thrived on the assumption that men would always be willing to pay. It was a one-way street paved with gold. But when that paved road turned into a toll bridge that men stopped crossing, the entire neighborhood of luxury shops and overpriced cafes found themselves without customers. Think about it. When a restaurant is built on the idea that men will pay triple the price just to look good for a date, what happens when men decide that a home-cooked meal is a much better financial deal? The restaurant closes, and that is exactly what we see happening in every corner of the city. But here is why this is not just about a few failed businesses. It is about a demographic collapse. When the cost of marriage and family formation exceeds the benefit, men opt out of the competitive mating market. They are not just stopping the dates, they are stopping the entire pursuit of the traditional life that once kept the economy spinning. People react passionately because this is not just about money, it is about the redefinition of gender roles. The economic data is merely the symptom of a deeper cultural fracture regarding what men and women owe each other in a modern society. This trend will result in a more fragmented society where consumption is geared towards individual survival rather than community or partnership development. The market will continue to punish businesses that refuse to adapt. High-end restaurants and nightlife venues that rely on the old model are in a structural death spiral. We are looking at the end of an era where male financial sacrifice fueled the growth of the domestic service economy. The Korean economy is currently experiencing the consequences of failing to update its social and gender model to match its modern economic constraints. It is a brutal lesson in economics. When you take the incentives out of a system, the system stops working. And right now, the system in Korea is not just failing, it is being dismantled, piece by piece, by the very people who are expected to pay for its upkeep. If you think this is only happening in Korea, you are wrong. Japan went through a very similar phase. When economic stagnation met a hyper-consumerist culture, young men also withdrew. They became the so-called herbivore men, not out of choice, but out of a rational assessment of their economic reality. This is not just a Korean phenomenon, it is a manifestation of the herbivore men trend that first emerged in Japan, though in Korea, the transition is far more compressed and aggressive. Where Japan's economic stagnation allowed for a slower generational shift into a more solitary, cost-conscious life, Korea's hyper-competitive social landscape means that when the collapse happens, it happens rapidly and with immense force. The societal reaction, a mix of confusion, accusation, and blame, fails to acknowledge that the market is simply responding to a rationalized shift in consumer behavior. When the price of admission, both financial and emotional, to the traditional romantic hierarchy outweighs the potential benefits, the market participants simply exit. And as they do, the industries that relied on them, from luxury retail to the massive, sprawling nightlife sector, find themselves in a position where they cannot be saved by subsidies or protests, because their entire existence was dependent on a consumer behavior that has fundamentally and perhaps permanently changed. So, what is the conclusion here? It is not about greed. It is not about delivery fees. It is about a complete and total misalignment between what society expects and what individuals are willing to provide. And as long as society keeps demanding the benefits of a bygone era without providing the necessary conditions for men to thrive within it, this economic collapse will only continue to accelerate. The reality is stark. The storefronts in Seoul will not be filled by nostalgia. They will be filled by businesses that realize the customer has changed, the rules have changed, and the game is over. Fuel the truth at Dating in Korea. Support the structure. Stay safe in the lounge.